Hello, and welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. On this podcast, we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Josh. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, good morning, Charlene. Thank you for having me.
We start every show with getting to know a little bit about our Sibs family a little more. So, Josh, can you please lay out your family structure and what disability your sibling has?
Absolutely. I am the oldest of three boys. I also have a slight tweak in our family dynamic where my other two brothers, they share both same father and mother. I have a different father, but their father largely played a part in raising me, since I could remember. So I say that just to say, ultimately, we grew up collectively with both of our parents in the household. With my two other brothers, there's one that is about 17 months younger than me. So we grew up relatively close. His name's Chris. And then the youngest is Akeem. He is the one that has special needs, specifically has Downs, and he is about 8.5 years younger than me. Just wanted to kind of provide that context because largely when I talk today, it'll be through the lens of, anytime I reference my parents, I will be referencing my technically stepdad, who often refer to as dad as well, because he was the one who was raising all of us and is the father of my special needs sibling.
Cool. That's an interesting dynamic, too. Like, all three of those components together make for a really interesting cup of tea, which is exciting. Like, I'm glad that we got, like, in contact and we can talk about it, because is, it's something that's important, I think, at least for me personally, where being able to meet other sibs who just grew up different, right? Because because me and my sister grew up in the same house and we're 2 years apart, and that's a lot of the stories that when I've talked to a majority of people, they're kind of in that ballpark, right? There's some people I've talked to that are adopted. There's various things, but it's exciting to see, yeah, like just mixed families of different kinds, and it's I don't know, I love it. I love seeing the difference in how families raise their kids so that we have all different experience, but yet I bet we're gonna have a lot of overlap in how we feel about stuff as the oldest of our sibling that has a disability. I'm sure there would be a decent amount of overlap there. So with that said, we like to keep it open forum. What would you like to talk about today on the podcast?
I think that given that, there's so many different areas I think you could dive into. I think, one of the central kind of themes of my experience with him is just the dynamic of us growing up as boys. I think that's the foundation in our household, right? My mom was the only woman in the house. And
Yeah.
so there were a lot of things that I think, from in reflective sense, my brother Akeem, I'll refer to him because he's kind of going to be the star player of most of these stories here. He got treated in a way that really wasn't reflective of his condition, and I said that mainly because I think my other brother Chris and I, we weren't even aware that he had some type of special needs condition until maybe he was like maybe 3 or 4.
Oh, okay.
So we didn't know. We didn't know. And so and I honestly, I'm probably being generous in terms of that being the earliest. I think that's just the earliest when I felt like as a kid I didn't necessarily know, or I maybe couldn't articulate my thoughts, but I had a suspicion that there was something different, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yes.
And so the funny part in that story is, just without oversharing too much, but I apologize. My mom knows I'm very transparent. Um, he wasn't planned.
Mm.
so
Mm-hmm.
so I think my mom was even on birth control, if I'm not mistaken, and he still came, right? So what was interesting about that dynamic is, I'm eight, eight, yeah, I think I was about 7.5 or 8 when I first found out she was pregnant, was gonna have another sibling. I was just excited because I was like, okay, me and my brother Chris are so close in age that my mom used to dress us up as twins, and she would, like we just had to do everything together, and we were both very competitive. So even though we were brothers and mostly got along, we were still boys. So we were always arguing, fighting like almost every day. So having another sibling that was going to have such a age gap, I was excited because I was like, okay, I actually get to have a sibling that like looks up to me and that can like I'm old enough to kind of like help mold and guide them a little bit, right? Not like as an adult, but I just mean like, oh, I'm the big brother type of thing. So I was excited for that. And I'll never forget, fast forward now, my mom's delivered him, he's at the house. We were at school, but we knew she was like going to be delivered that day. He was going to be delivered that day. So we're excited to get home. And I'll never forget, we go in the house, we see him in the crib, and I remember looking at him and I was like, why does he look Asian? Because he has this certain, and I say that right because this is the very early sets of Downs. They have certain common physical
Oh,
features
right,
sometimes,
right, right.
especially
That's
around the
so
eyes. So
funny.
for me, I was like that. And again, this is my little 8-year-old mind, right? Like that was like one of my first thoughts. And then my other brother, bless his heart, Chris, he's looking at me, he's like, why is he so light? Shouldn't he be dark? Like so I say that to say, like, this is the foundation of how all this stuff happens, right? We're just asking these questions. We're having the intrusive thoughts as a kid. They always come to the surface. You don't have that
Yeah,
filter
there's
yet.
no filter. You're just being a kid. Like you're just being normal. Like that's just neurotypical kids being
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So fast forward, right? Like my parents don't really engage us in that. And I'm so excited. I'm just like, oh, I got a baby brother. I'm super excited. Da da da. Right. So again, now he's growing and molding and all those kind of things. So it's all the normal stuff, right? You're feeding them, you play with them, all those kind of things. But there were certain things that, again, I think around his age of like 3, I started to like be like, huh, I wonder what's going on here. And again, I was still to this day never really investigated to see if like this was tied to it, but like potty training, it was like, okay, he's still in diapers, and I'm like, I'm big brother, I'm changing his diaper all the time. I'm like, I'm tired of smelling this. He's starting to get grown man smells, like or grown up smells. I'm like, well, something's gotta give. And mom was like, "Oh, be patient. Everybody's not a fast learner like you, because apparently I learned very, very early, and I was like super easy." And so, but I guess historically they say that boys, in comparison to girls, like as toddlers or whatever, they're a little bit slower in that development in general. A lot of times, and when it comes to potty training. So again,
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
again, I don't know the scientific part about it. I'm not going to profess or even attempt to. That's just kind of like, rule of thumb that I've kind of heard, over time. So, so I say that part mainly just to say that that was my first thought because it was tied to that. And again, not really related, but ultimately I remember actually he ended up being in diapers, I think at least until he was probably like 5 or 6, if I'm not mistaken. Because I do remember him being in school, like either pre-K or kindergarten, and still having them. So, it took some time, right? It took some time. He eventually got it. He was good. But there were so many different components. And again, another one, and this one's probably the most traumatic, unfortunately. Um, I want to say he was probably still under 2 because he wasn't walking, crawling yet, anything like that. He was rolling, though, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Back in my mom's apartment. This is before they officially got married, so we were just living with my mom, and then dad would come over, or we would spend weekends with him, or whatever the case is, right? Um, we lived on the second floor of an apartment complex, and I have a stepsister, which is a daughter from his Akeem's dad from another relationship earlier that was about 2.5, 3 years older than me. So she was living with us for a few years during this time. And I'll never forget, um, we had a little like patio, I guess, or balcony, that was in the back, and it faced our alley. And in the alley is where my friends and I, we would all play. You playing catch, tag, football, whatever. And so I'll never forget my sister was up there on the balcony with him. She's feeding him and just watching us. And I didn't know this. I'm telling you this part in retrospect, but basically my sister at the time had got up and like ran into the kitchen to like grab something and left him out there on the balcony. And again, I didn't know because as a kid, I'm just playing around running or whatever. But out of nowhere, I happened to just turn around and I see my little brother on the floor, like where I'm at. And
Oh,
he's laying on his back. So he fell off the second story.
what?
Yeah, he fell off the second story. Um, in retrospect, I definitely wish I didn't do this, but again, I was a kid. I ran up to him and I was so confused. I was like, how did he get down here? I'm like looking for my sister, like, where is she? And I'm thinking maybe she came outside or, you know what I mean? Like, she's down here with him, but I don't know. But then she goes back on the balcony. She freaks out, starts screaming at the top of her lungs. So that's when it hit me like, okay, he did fall. And I probably should not have touched him, but I picked him up. And he wasn't crying. He was just kind of staring, like just looking out. And ended up calling the ambulance. He had to get taken to Children's Hospital. And at the time, my mom and our dad were vacationing in Vegas. So my grandmother was the one in the house watching all of us. So that was just a very traumatic experience because I didn't know what was going to happen to him or if anything happened. And so we're all crying hysterically and this and that other. And fast forward, I think he ended up having what they classify as like maybe a hairline fracture to skull, but he had no internal bleeding. He had no major injuries. They didn't think there was going to be anything permanent from it. So that happened. And, fast forward, right? Up until this point, as well as when he was, you know, I guess 2 years later than this approximately, he's still like not fully potty trained. My parents have not told us that he is special needs. So I
Mm,
don't have any context of like any delayed developments, what to attribute those things to. We're literally just like, again, just kids like, oh, well, babies do this, they do that. So we're just looking at that in that, like, not using the word normal, but in our minds, what we thought was normal, right?
right.
And so fast forward, I think it was maybe around like 5 or 6 when he officially started going to school. We actually had learned like he was special needs. And even then, the only thing that really resonated with me was, oh, he looks just like, and I forgot the guy's name, so let's just call him Kevin. Kevin was this Kevin was this older guy, right? He was probably at least like 7, maybe not, somewhere in that 7 to 9 year range, older than me. And we would spend our summers going to like these little like camps, the like Boys and Girls Club, YMCA type of thing. So we would go to these little things. They'd have like you could go swimming, you could play pool, you could play table tennis, all those things, right? And I'll never forget those. We loved playing pool. And there was a guy that was really, really good. He used to always come in with his own pool stick and everything. And this was the guy, Kevin. Kevin had Downs as well because he had that kind of distinctive eye feature. I never I never knew at the time that he was special need when we were playing him because I was just like, this guy's just good. Like nobody can beat him, right? And so when she told us he had Downs, I was like, that was my response. Was like, oh, is that why Akeem looks like Kevin? And she didn't know who Kevin was, but in my mind, I'm like, yo, this is a guy we play pool with,
Right, right,
and
right.
like they have similar facial features, but they're not related, at least not to my knowledge. So I was always just kind of confused. So there's just all these little things for me that just never made sense, right? And I'm trying to connect the dots on. So fast forward, you know, um, I started to learn over time what all this meant. There would be some delayed things. One of the elements that I think was the most notable for him was his speech. He could understand things, but he understanding him was a challenge, because he couldn't fully enunciate his words all the time. So we had sometimes we would use sign language, right? They taught him sign language so that way he could signal for certain things if we didn't understand it. And so because of all those foundational experiences, right, where we've basically had 4 or 5 years of in our minds as kids treating him like a normal kid, just because our parents told us that okay, he's a special need, we weren't going to switch up how we were treating him. We were just like, okay, like, we take him to the park with us, we let him play basketball with us, or we play on the playground. So we're gonna keep doing all the same things we do. When we hang out with our friends, sometimes we would bring him with us over the years, and he was socialized with them. And oddly enough, we never really introduced him to our friends as here's our special need brother Akeem, right? My brother Chris and I would just be like, oh, this is our baby brother Akeem. That's it. And they would interact with him. And I obviously they were intelligent enough at that point in time, because we're probably all at least like 10 and up at this point. They know that there is some difference. So they're not necessarily treating him different, but they are very like sensitive to where they're nice, they talk to him, even though he's talking, they don't understand him, like they'll still try to carry conversation with him. And so I'm helping along the way, like, oh, he means this or he's trying to say this. And so then they'll respond to him. And so, he became friends with a lot of our friends.
Oh, that's cool.
And so growing up, he was socialized around a lot of just, I guess, traditionally functional people in that sense. So he did not, outside of his classroom setting or dynamic, he didn't necessarily surround himself with other special needs children. He was always around my brother, myself, and our friends. And I think because of that, you know, we would get comments like, "Oh, it's so great how you guys treat him, or you guys bring him along, and he's always a part of the group, and he's very outgoing and very friendly." And so those kind of comments were coming from like adults, whether it was like family friends or educators in school system, or sometimes just random strangers out and about. They would make comments, and my mom loves shopping. She, I always say that she struggled with retail therapy. That was her thing. So she always bought us a lot of clothes, right? Way more than we ever needed. But she did the same thing with him. So he dressed really nice. So that would be another thing. They're like, yeah, you guys treat him really well, and he dresses nice all the time, and this and that. So they were taken back, and I think I'll never forget that one of the days we were having a meeting with like the teachers, and I'm sitting in there with them just because I like to hear and learn all of this. And I think I'm probably a teenager at this point, so I'm at least like 14 or 15. And they made a comment about how they're like, yeah, unfortunately sometimes we see some families that they don't bring their kid out, they just keep them in the house all the time, or they don't always like make sure his hygiene is upkept or his physical appearance like is put together. So they feel like there's sometimes a level of neglect on maybe some of the ancillary pieces of raising one, because obviously they're going to feed them, they're going to make sure they're safe, and they have all the basic necessities, but things like how they look, how they carry themselves, do you bring them out in certain social settings? Like those were things that I guess a lot of these educators weren't used to seeing in a consistent capacity until they had observed our family dynamic. So that was a really interesting thing that I don't know that I fully understood the gravity of initially, but I do remember hearing it and it kind of stuck with me. And I was like, I wonder why that is, because I was like, I felt sad for. I was like, "Dang, like other special needs kids don't get to like hang out with their older siblings and their older
Mm.
siblings' friends." Like I was,
Mhm.
it was just a
Yeah.
weird question to me, right? And so
Yeah.
as boys, I think that was the other piece to it that I think probably made it easier. Obviously, I think if it was if it was like if I had a baby sister, maybe I would have been slightly different. But I think it would have been like just a different type of protectiveness that unfortunately exists in our society, right? How the differences between how you raise boys and how you raise girls in general. So I probably would have been a little bit different just because of that, I think for sure. But because he was a boy just like us, we used to do all the same things. We wrestle with him, we play with him, play fight, all those different things with him. And I think that it did help him in a lot of ways in terms of just his development and just being able to like move around and learn things. But there were still some challenges, I would say, along the way. There was definitely different challenges, but I would say foundationally, like that was, maybe like the first 10 odd years of our experience of having a special needs sibling.
Interesting. I I'm thinking about, like, the last part where we're talking about like you being all boys versus if you had a sister, and I think about that now and I go, that's such an interesting thing as an older sister. I feel like the the nurturing pathway we'll call it, right? That's kind of naturally in the ecosystem or whatever. And I go, "Oh, that is different." Because it's and I don't I'm not a scientist or a psychologist or anything, right? But just purely based off what people what stories I've heard from other people that are like me and whatever, right? It's like the nurturing part is very different than the like, oh, I just want to go play part. And I think that is interesting where if like I had a younger brother, I don't necessarily know how I would like how that would be different either. Like, oh, would we play more or would I still be just as protective over him as my sister, you know?
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think we were definitely like protective of him because of the delay in his speech, right? Like him not being able to like fully articulate himself. Like my brother and I, and our parents, we can read and understand what he was either trying to say or read his body language mannerisms, like, okay, and put both together. So we were just always mindful of like, okay, when he's talking to other people, like making sure we could be there to kind of help filter or facilitate that conversation to some degree because he was social. So in his mind, I'm sure he was like, I don't see anything different. So somebody's like, hey, how are you doing? And he's like, hi. And then he'll start talking about all this other stuff. And you can probably only understand every third, fourth, or fifth word at that time, right? And so there was just little things that in hindsight it's like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder if this is tied to his experience or or condition, right? And I think largely though, just being three boys, I was protective as the oldest, um, just to make sure nothing happened to him. But at the same time, I think I was also like, I in my mind I thought, okay, eventually he'll learn certain stuff and like he could play sports like us and he could do all these other things, right? I was still excited about that. And fast forward, he never really played sports, right? And I wish he had that opportunity because I do know that programs of some sort and resources exist to help provide that kind of access, but I'm not sure if it was as readily available in the area we were in. Just because by the time he was born and then got old enough to where he was in school, that period of time we kind of grew up in a suburb of San Diego, California, that was still in the early developmental stages. Like the city itself was probably only maybe like 2 or 3 years old, maybe a little bit, but it was still being like you could literally see mountains and you could see them building, hundreds of houses. Like it was that much in transition. And so there were a lot of resources that were being poured in there, but I still think a lot of things might have been on the developmental side still, where it wasn't as robust or as comprehensive yet. And the parts that were, though, he got access to. I think my mom and my dad did a great job of just prioritizing him and making sure that he went to a elementary that had those types of resources. He didn't just go to the one that was right down the street, even though it was a good school. It didn't have the same type of resources for him, so he was able to go to one that was like an extra 2 or 3 miles away. And so um, things like that always matter to our parents in terms of just like education and making sure we are in good school systems and things like that. Even if early on, when like my brother and I were really young, we kind of grew up in a I would classify as maybe the hood part in San Diego, we still got bussed out to go to the like really quote unquote good schools. So once we now live in these areas, they were still very intentional about, okay, like, yeah, we're in good schools, but is this a fit for him? And so he ended up eventually going to the same high school that my brother and I graduated from, which was nice because by that time, since we had already brought him around, I played football, ran track. My brother also played football. He played also played basketball. So we were always going to different games and events, and we were bringing him. So he had met all of our friends, but then he also had exposure to the different teachers and administrators at the high school. So when he finally came to the school, a lot of the administrators already knew him and recognized him. And so he had an extra layer of like support and protection in that way as well. And the interesting part about it is, um, I think by this time I'm in college in the early stages of his high school, but I ended up staying local and going to a private school that was down the street because I was playing football still. And one of the benefits to it was that now I'm still in my hometown. I can go home and do all the normal things you do when you get homesick or you just want to get a home cooked meal or do free laundry, whatever, right? But in addition to that, what I did in relation to my youngest brother Akeem is he had what they called IEP meetings that would happen. I forgot the frequency. I want to say like once every quarter or
Yeah,
once
those
a
are generally once a
semester.
quarter, I think. I remember like
Yeah.
that growing up.
So exactly. So he had those. So I would attend a lot of those, either with my parents or sometimes in absence of my parents. Like if my mom was working, she's like, "I can't go. Can you?" I would go. And it was nice because obviously I'm from that school. I graduated, so I still know a lot of people. So you're catching up with old counselors, this, that, other, and they're like, "What are you here from?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm here for my brother's IEP meeting." So the ones that didn't know, they're like, "Oh, Akeem's your brother." So there was always that extra. There was always that extra piece too, right? And so being in those meetings where they're talking about his like developmental progress or where he's currently at and what they want to do, and it was for me, I didn't realize it, but it was almost like a precursor, or planting a seed to what would become a critical piece of my adult professional experience because I ended up working in higher education for 10 years. And I say that because I never planned on working in education in that capacity. Granted, I loved school growing up. I was still a business major, so I always thought I was going to go do things tied to that. And so to go through life and have all these different experiences and then find myself working as like an academic coordinator initially, right, where I would work with like first generation college students, students that were from considered low income, by definition of being like Pell Grant recipients. And then another subset of that was considered underrepresented populations, or um, you had a documented learning disability. So what was interesting about it is, I grew up in a house where neither of my parents, even though my biological dad went to college, neither of my parents who raised me in the house had graduated from college. So by that definition, I was technically a first generation college student from an experience standpoint, right? And then I was also part of the underrepresented population, because that was classified as Native American or Black American slash African American, right? So I fit that bucket as well. Then we also were Pell Grant recipients. So I was in that bucket. The only thing I did not qualify for, which you didn't have to qualify for every one of those to be a part of the program that I worked for, but I'm just saying the interesting element to it was, okay, I'm working this program where I support these four different targeted populations. I qualify in some direct or indirect capacity to all three of them. And the fourth one being the learning disability, I have exposure with that through my brother, right? I don't personally have those challenges, but I was adjacent to it. And so the irony in that situation was that me having that exposure, I was like, oh, I'm comfortable with this. But then I also, through that job, learned, okay, I learned about what like Asperger's was or being on the spectrum and all of those elements. And I was like, I had no idea. Like, and so I'm like, for me to have a special needs brother, I felt like very uneducated about like all the other
Right.
experiences, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I
yeah.
was grateful. I was grateful going through the work and learning about them, but that what was a revelation for me at that time is as they're teaching us what some of these different conditions are and just some general guidelines of how to help support it, I started to kind of learn that like even with like different forms of autism, when they started explaining what some of those symptoms are, my brother actually displayed a lot of them.
Oh, okay.
So what is interesting to me to this day, and because I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to even attempt to like diagnose him or anything, but just again, learning and having conversations about it, I'm listening and learning. I'm like, my brother does this. A lot of his social cues that he learned weren't just through watching us interact. He used to mimic a lot of stuff he saw on TV, in particular in movies. I'll never forget, and it's like a running joke with us with my other brother Chris and I. We always joke about how like he has a habit even to this day, Akeem, of watching the same movie over and over
Yep.
and over and over again. And when I mean
Nonstop.
over, I
Yep.
literally mean he'll play that movie on loop for days.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, you don't want to rotate, you don't want to alternate between a couple other movies. And it's like, and he has movies he likes, but he's just stuck on this one movie right now. And so a movie like that, for example, was like growing up, like he loved Jumanji, right? Because he loved animals. So Jumanji was a big one for him. He loved Sandlot because he loved dogs.
Mm.
So
Oh yeah.
Sandlot was another
Interesting.
one that he absolutely loved, right? So he loved movies like that. There was another one called Monkey Trouble. Those were like his probably like key primary movies that he loved because of the animal element. But then, growing up in our household and our culture, we got exposed to other movies that we probably shouldn't have watched as young as we did.
Right.
And so a movie like that, for example, was this movie called Friday. It's a popular early '90s movie that stars Ice Cube and Chris Tucker. And it has like elements of drug use in there. It's a comedy, right? So they're not like promoting the use of drugs, but it's kind of centered around marijuana, right? And so he would see this and we're laughing and joking stuff. He, like any other kid, he's gravitating towards the worst parts of the movie, right? He remembers the worst lines, the mannerisms of smoking, and then he's going to class or daycare or kindergarten or whatever, and he's mimicking these things.
Oh
So they're like, so
no.
they're thinking in their head, like, what is going on in this house?
Right.
so there were conversations like that, right? That would happen. And so I say all those things to say he would do this stuff regularly, like to the point where my brother and I were numb to it. But when people that did not interact with him on a daily capacity, like friends of ours or family friends, they'd be like, hold on, what is he doing? Is this from such and such movie? We're like, yep. Like he does this
Yeah.
all the time. So I say all that just to say, having a special needs sibling helped me be better in my job because I realized that I had developed a naturally higher level of patience with just people and different learning styles. And then I think also it helped me appreciate, I think, the simplicity that I think that special needs or folks that have special needs can offer. And what I mean by that is simply he may not have been able to do everything or fully articulate himself the way he wanted to. But one thing that he always felt in our household growing up was love. Like we all loved him. He never had a doubt about that. Again, my brother and I never really treated him any different, So we're just like, look, we're gonna do all the same things we did, except maybe like beat you up because other brother and I are close enough in age.
Right.
We're fighting each other. We're not gonna fight our little brother
Yeah.
who's 8 years younger than us, but also special need. Like no,
Yeah,
but
that would be
everything else,
unfair.
yeah, everything else as boys we would do with him, like everything. So I say that to say he just helped me also remind me of like he was a very sensitive person growing up. And so even though there were, three of us as brothers, my mom always said that him and I had a special relationship because he would get overly emotional with me. And it would be like through my high school graduation party or my birthday or anything like that, he would get super, super emotional because he's overwhelmed in a happy sense, but doesn't know how to process and channel those happy emotions. So they come out as happy tears, but he can't really articulate himself to be like, I'm crying because I'm happy, right? He's just overwhelmed with the feeling. And I knew what it was, so I would talk to him and be like, hey, we're good, man. Like, let's just breathe. I would like, take deep breaths, inhale, exhale, do stuff like that just to kind of just navigate with him. And I say that because I was probably a little bit more sensitive as a very young kid growing up too. So I think I empathize just on that element of it. And I always wanted him to feel like he could be his authentic self in terms of how he felt, because there were periods of time for me growing up when I was younger, I didn't feel like I could share all those things or be all those things for different reasons. And so in my mind, I was like, man, I just want him, if nothing else, I want him to be able to do that with me. And so my mom was just like, she wasn't able to connect the dots on like the why, but she would just be like, yeah, he loves everybody, but he has a special connection with Josh. And and I would be able to talk him through his frustrations a little better than most, or calm him down, or cheer him up. And so there were just certain things I could help him navigate it a little bit more emotionally. And I think part of it was also because he has some limited abilities, again, through his exposure. The one thing that everybody could know with him is he was a happy kid, and he loved people. He loved to help. He loved to just do anything that we as a society would say was like, contributing, doing your part. And so in high school, part of the program he was in, they had this, I forgot what it's called, but basically it was like an immersion program where, like, even though they had him in these special need classes, he would have a period of his day he would spend in with general population, for lack of better
Yeah, it's
terms,
like
right? So
inclusion, or the version
yes,
that I got was inclusion. So I think that
yes.
might be it.
So he would do that. So he had a whole bunch of friends from those classes that they loved him. You know what I mean? And they'd be like, "Yeah, man, he always dressed for fly. I want to be like him when I grow up." And they're just
Oh, that's cool.
back and forth with him. You know what I mean? And he was just so chill about it. He was just super chill about it. So it was a scenario where, again, you don't always have like context as you're experiencing it in the here and now, but like looking back and thinking on those things, he was just very social, very loving to everybody, and I think because he gave that out, everybody gave that back to him. And so what I appreciated was the way he conducted himself would always remind me of what life is really supposed to be about, which is relationships and trying to make sure that we don't know when we're going to pass, right? A random accident can happen the next day, or you can live, until you're 100 plus, and anything in between that, right? We don't have full control over any of those things. What you control though every day is how you respond to what happens in life. You may not be able to control all your elements of life, but you can control how you think and how you respond to those things. And I believe that in having a brother with his condition and the relationship we developed, he helped remind me to keep things simple, especially in moments that you were dealing with something very complicated or life in general just become complicated. It's like simplify it, get back to the basics, and I think that also served me in my role as an educator. When I worked as an academic coordinator and then eventually a manager and director for those types of populations, and then carried over to my personal life, where I remember I'm trying to think the exact year. I don't know the exact year, but I used to bring him on campus with me when I was in college. So he would stay in the dorms with me sometimes on the weekends. So I had him around my friends in college as well. So they all knew him as well. I wouldn't take him to the college parties because I feel like that was dangerous on a slippery slope, right? I don't
Yeah.
want to be responsible for somebody trying to offer him a beer and now we got a whole situation in our hands. But like just the dorm rooms or just going to like basketball or football games, stuff like that, like yes, I would help expose him or just bring him around in those spaces. And so I say all those things just to say, as much as, I think society sometimes would look and try to, give us like the proverbial pat on the back, like, oh, you're a good brother. This and that. I'm like, no, he's a good brother to me. For what they think I'm giving him, he's giving me so much too. You just might not be able to see it because they're intangible. But, the virtues and the value system I have, it's heavily influenced by having a brother with his condition and all the things I had to learn as a result of that and what he just exposed me to. So, there's a lot of other pieces obviously we can touch on. I know I'm probably rambling on, so I'll kind of stop if you have any questions about any of the stuff I shared. But largely that was a lot of the experience for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of like funny stuff that I was thinking about growing up with my sister, like the movies. So my sister, so I'm trying to remember. I don't remember the exact things, but do you remember? So Disney used to do these like sing along tapes where they would have the words and they would be in the parks and they would sing all these songs and then you have the characters like running around the parks and stuff, right? And so those tapes were probably like half an hour or something. And she would, we had the VHS versions. So the problem with that when you loop them is that eventually you can't watch them anymore because they strip they like you're stretching the tape, right?
Oh
And so
yeah.
we would it would like get to the song that she knew, but then would just like, glitch out because the tape would just be worn out. And so it's been really interesting now, or not now, but when DVDs came out, because then we would have, more longevity than just the tape. But then the discs would scratch because she was watching them so much. I remember us having, you remember like portable DVD players when they were huge? And so on our vacations, on our long trips, she would just be sitting there. She would have like her DVDs just playing nonstop on her mini DVD player. And now she has streaming. So now those don't ever wear out. They just, discontinue. I'm so curious to see what happens to families now when streaming services pull movies out because you
Yes.
can't watch them
Yes.
anymore.
Yes.
That's gotta be not good for
Yeah.
them.
Not at all. No. Yeah. They're not
Yeah.
happy for sure.
So I was just thinking about that when you were talking about your brother like watching them. And the other thing I was thinking about was is the IEP meetings because I for some I have this very strange memory and I call it strange because I was not old enough to participate, but my parents I must have not been old enough to be home by myself because I was there, but I was playing with my sister or doing something else, but I was in the room while it was happening. Which
Okay.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah, but it's weird because I don't think it happened that often. Because I think if it happened more often, I would have a more concrete memory of it. But I just remember that one. And the other thing was how you were saying that for your parents and that education was important, whether they even if that meant that you had to be bussed out. And so that happened with my sister as well, where from where my parents lived and where we grew up, my sister hopped on a school bus and her school was across the whole city. And so, but that was where like the programs existed that were better for her and like they just had a better they had better programs for kids with disabilities because they were a elementary school that kind of specialized in it, and so that was something that my parents that was like really important. And I don't think I realized the value of that until she went into middle school where the program, unfortunately, the teacher that was there with that program retired and the person that replaced her was not so great. That one, and then my mom pulled her out actually because it was that bad. Where we just actually took her out of the public school system. But when she went back into high school, it was a much better program. She was a lot happier. Teachers there were great. Like, she had a better community. It's so interesting how, yeah, just the environments that they're in can really foster for the better or worse. And in compounding with that, I don't think I really recognized until I was kind of listening to your whole story, and it made me think about how much trajectory has shifted due to my sister having a disability. And I think that's something that most people don't really realize so much later when they're older and can actually, have the brain cells to think about that. But it's just so interesting because like you said multiple times, right? In real time, when you're living it, you don't even think about it. You just go, this is my life, this is my sister, this is my brother, what like that's just how you live. It's not you don't know anything else. And but the older you get, the more that you see, oh, that's not everyone's lived experience. I guess that's different. And so it's really made me think about again how different that is, because I think one of the differences, and I don't think this is a brother sister difference. I think that this might be just a my parents, when my sister was diagnosed, they they were more not as social, and so me and my sister also would kind of we were kind of home all the time, and in real time I didn't think about that. I was like, oh, we just don't go out a lot. But I realize now as an adult, I go, oh, that could have been a choice on their part where they just didn't want to spend the energy or whatever. Then those are their choices. I can't control that, but it's interesting to think about. I think if that part was different, I would have taken my sister out to just do a bunch of stuff. Um, and so it makes me happy to know that at least for you and both your brothers, you guys just did everything together, because it's something that I think I I not until talking to other sibs like yourself on this podcast have realized, oh, like the the social interaction part of being a kid, whether you have a disability or you're a sibling to someone with a disability, like that social part is still so important. And I don't think I really, and I still don't really understand it, but I think I'm slowly realizing, like, oh, like having that type of, we'll call it normalcy. You and I both know what that means, just but I use that very lightly in air quotes, like the normalcy of really just, yeah, like we're gonna go get ice cream and we're gonna go to this restaurant and we're gonna go play basketball, like go to the playground, all that stuff. And I think those were my favorite times with my sister, was when we would just go to the playground. Like my mom would just take us, she would sit there and we would just do stuff, right? And because that was her time, like she loves slides. I think she still does. And that was like her favorite part. She would just do the looping thing where she would climb up and slide down for like an hour, right? Like that was her favorite thing to do. But I think that that's something that I very I forget about it a lot, just because from my personal experience, because it I we me and my sister didn't do as much normal stuff outside our house. I think that's something I forget sometimes, is that part was actually really good and really important in the grander stage of both our development as people, right? Both her and for me, especially because we were closer in age. We are 2 years apart. So I'm older than her by 2 years, yeah. So when she went into middle school, so that was the one time we were at the same school. So I would have been in eighth grade, she was in sixth grade, and so it was this. For me, I call it a terrible experience because I would sit in history class, and where our room was located, it's very much like your story about like you and watching your brother on the balcony with your sister. Like I could see through this window what my sister was doing like during her PE period, and I just like wanted to rip my hair out every time, because I could visually see that she was doing all these behaviors that aren't like that's part of her IEP to not do that. Like it, and so I was dying because I was like, I'm watching in real time what's happening, and I go, that's not okay. Like what? Yeah. So that part, and that's why like that was probably the worst part of her schooling, was just that one year. Because really, like her elementary school was great. Like that, like when I look back at when we went at like their open houses, and when we look at like pictures of like all the stuff she did, she's so happy. And you look at her pictures from sixth grade, and my mom was kind of just wants to burn them because they're not good. They're not good memories. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, right, is that though there was a little bit of a contrast in experience, obviously just because, like you said, right, they're just different family dynamics. You don't always have perspective on it until you get older and get exposed to other things or have conversations where it's like you now have a little bit more informed perspective, like, oh, that's not common, or what I did was different, or whatever the case is, right? The difference though, or what I think is interesting, is that the tone of your experience was kind of largely influenced or adopted from your parents' perspective, right? They kind of set the tone. They kind of set the tone. And so your situation or how you experienced it built off of that. And then you juxtapose that with what happened on my end, right, with my brother and I, where my mom didn't really tell us a whole lot, and so we just kept treating him like quote unquote normal, and did all the things, right? And even though there's those different experiences, right? One thing that is common between is that both of them still had happy childhoods or happy upbringing. And so I think what it does is it speaks to the resilient nature that I think all people have, and that doesn't exclude, people that have different types of developmental or learning disabilities. They may have a different challenge or learning curve with it, but they still can do it as long as they have the right support system and tools or resources in place. So, it's funny in some respects hearing you talk about your mom being like, "Oh, I want to burn these pictures," and like almost kind of like block those memories out. But like, I'm sure for your sisters, like it's not a bad memory for her. And so because she doesn't have any other perspective. She doesn't know any better, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I
Mm.
think it's one of those scenarios where me now being a parent, I have a 1 year old, so it's I think I'm learning and understanding things in a slightly different perspective with respect to my parents, and I feel like it's not unique to me, but I think that there is a slight tweak or uniqueness to it for first kids, the oldest, because we have a shared experience, regardless to some degree of cultures and
Yes.
backgrounds, where it's like we're the guinea pigs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To some degree. And it's like, okay, we were frustrated probably about a lot of things that we didn't really know whether it was right or wrong, but we just knew we didn't like it. And then it's like once you finally get exposure, like you see your parents move a different way with your other sibling, now you're like, okay, I do have a forward perspective. I don't like it because you're doing something different, and that's what I wanted, or I don't want. I know I didn't want what you were doing, or whatever the case is. Right? There's just a piece that comes with it, and there's the expectations of. I would say you're not formally expected to be a parent, but I would say informally you are given expectations to do parent like things.
Right. Yeah. I agree.
And we never ask for it. It's just like it's just bestowed upon us, or you know what I mean? It's like you're sitting there thinking and it's like, I didn't ask to do any of this stuff, and at the time you don't think about it because you're just doing it, but it ends up manifesting in different ways. And so I know, for example, a lot of people who don't want to have kids because they're like, I had to raise my sibling, what I mean, or siblings. Especially like I would say, even in the dynamic right of like the difference between boys and girls. Like I know a lot of times that responsibility in families can be put on older siblings, especially if it's a girl. They're put, but the difference was even though I wasn't a girl, I had similar expectations placed on me, and I say how that's manifested is probably a whole separate
I was
podcast and
gonna say
conversation.
we could have a whole different conversation about like you being a dad now and like to get there like that. That's literally we could have a
Yes,
whole separate
yeah,
conversation and yeah.
absolutely. But I'll say this part to it though is that it's not all bad, right? It's like yeah, there were frustrating moments. There's still frustrating things that some of us might unpack. Maybe you're going to therapy. Maybe you're just managing it. Whatever. Uh, how it's shown up for me is that I do have this self-imposed expectation that I know my brother is still going to need his parents basically for the bulk of his life, right? Like because he if maybe if he would have got different resources or more comprehensive resources, he could live independently. But right now, that's just not the case, and maybe that could change at some point, but it's not right now. The difference and the challenge now is that I, being a father, is like I have to prioritize the need of my own son and place him first. And so that's a reshuffling of priorities. Um, and ironically, it's not really the first time I was faced with it, but I think this is a different case because when I got married, there was that challenge of reprioritizing as well, right? Because you get married now, you're with your partner, your life, you know, spouse or whatever. So you got to prioritize her needs as well, and that has to go above anybody else because that's what you signed up for. That's why you guys got married. And so I say that part to say it's kind of been a little bit of a roller coaster, and
Yeah.
and where it's currently at is like when I moved to Dallas because I'm born and raised in San Diego, as I mentioned, or and went to college there. I met my now ex-wife, but then college sweetheart, and we were married for like 10 years and together for almost 17 years. So once, going through that divorce process, I'm like, okay, I kind of got like a new lease on life because we don't have kids, don't have any of the situations. So I can I can really explore any and everything now. So I started looking for jobs elsewhere. And by this time I was no longer working in higher education. So I had changed careers after getting my MBA and was like, okay, I'm gonna go and do something else because California is too expensive. So either I need to learn to get a higher paid job or I need to move out of state, maybe both.
Right.
and so and
Ideally, both
so
would be good.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I
And that's
did.
ultimately what happened. Yeah, no, yeah, me and you both. I was like, get a better paying job and career path, and I moved out of state so that money can go longer, right? So
Exactly. Yep.
when I was looking at different places, though, Dallas was one of the options for several reasons because both of my biological parents are from nearby Fort Worth. So even though I was born and raised in
Oh,
California, I
interesting.
have a lot of family in this area. And then during the kind of COVID lockdown that happened in 2020 in California, where everything was closed, my mom had relocated back to Fort Worth with my youngest brother, who had never lived out of San Diego or California for that matter.
Oh,
So that
fascinating.
so post divorce, I'm now like, okay, I can go do anything I want to do. Right, this is like the first time in my life I could technically make the most selfish decision, and it's okay. Like I'm not married, so I don't have a spouse to consider.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's a
don't
good
have
time.
kids, so I don't have to think about that. You know what I mean? My brother's with my mom. My other brother has his daughter, and they're in their own city. So I'm like, I can really do whatever I want, and yet and still, I ultimately leaned towards and ultimately decided to come to Dallas because it was going to be closer to my youngest brother, where I could help support my mom with him. And so when I got here, immediately I was, working through the transition because it was a big experience, even though I moved here at 36. Just moving somewhere else, let alone a different state, for the first time was gonna definitely have its own growing pains. But once I got settled and bought a home here, for the first year of that period, my brother lived with me. So this was before my son was born, and I did that because I wanted him to have a certain type of stability with me. And it just brought me a certain level of peace because if I know he's safe, I can kind of take care of focus on all the things I need to
Oh
focus on.
yeah, the subconscious level of the not being a parent but being a parent to know that your sib is okay. And that's that I mean that's why I moved. It's because my sister's housing was solidified to a level where I could move anywhere. At that point I was already married, but it gave me such a freedom to go I could do whatever I want and I know that she's safe. And that was a big thing like if her housing wasn't solidified, I don't think I would have made different choices probably, but to know that she's safe is such a big relief that
Yeah.
I don't think I really understood the impact of that until like you're sharing about your experience. Like, oh, that makes sense. Like that checks out. Like that's why it enabled me to move is because of that.
No, absolutely. And I'm glad that you've been able to have that experience because again, we as the older siblings, we sacrifice a lot, and I'm not saying that in a pity party. I just mean like when you really reflect and think about the things you're required or expected to do, it's everybody's not built for that role. So and there's nothing wrong. Like it's not to say bad because like again, some people recognize they're like, yeah, I don't ever want kids because I didn't really have the experience I wanted as a child being the oldest and having to do X, Y, and Z. So again, everybody's different, and I don't think that going one path, as an adult versus another is better long as so long as it's like, okay, you're not harming yourself, not harming others, and you're genuinely doing what you feel like is best for you. Like I don't think that's for anybody to judge. You know what I mean? Um, so that's why I'm like, you saying you can move and do certain things. I'm like, that's great. Like I love to hear that because in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, he doesn't live with me now still, but he still comes by periodically. He's Uncle Akeem to my son, and he wants to be around, which is great. That's a whole separate aspect, but that's been nice because he loves being an uncle. And my brother who lives in my other brother Chris who lives in Orange County with his now 3 or 4 year old, I forgot, I think it's 3 year old daughter. um you know we don't get to see them as much as often, but he'll come visit and bring my niece with him, so we'll all hang out and do stuff, and so we may not have the same access to each other in terms of the frequency, but the quality of it is still there whenever that does happen. And I think what I'm fortunate and grateful is that while our parents are, they're no longer together, they got divorced in college, and that was a whole separate thing that again we probably don't have the time to go down. But when that happened, there was a period of time where, as somebody who's now went through a divorce, I just understand how impactful that can be for people, and everybody doesn't always. One, everybody doesn't respond the same way because it's just not practical. But the other piece is you don't know how long it takes for people to kind of turn that leaf and or go to the next chapter, right? It can be a difficult process, and I'll without going into the specifics of it, and just being more respectful of like my parents and their experience with it, I will say that there was just a point in time where they weren't really communicating with each other, and the unintended consequence of that is that my brother Akeem did not have the same kind of access to them because he was his whole life, he from when he was born to growing up, he grew up with both parents in the household. My other brother, Chris, may not have necessarily grew up in the same household every single year of his life, but the bulk of his life, he not only had both parents in his life, just in terms of like, hey, we're living with mom right now when we're younger, but by the time we were 10, we all moved in together into the same house and then they built and everything. He still got to live with both of his biological parents. I never had that experience.
Oh,
I was always
interesting.
I
Okay.
was always now I'm not saying that in a way that's bad because I think I probably the poster child of what you would hope happens with a step parent type of
Right.
scenario where my
Yeah.
my my stepdad really stepped up. I don't call him stepdad except when I'm formally telling stories because I have to be able to distinguish between my biological dad and him. But when all my inner circle and people that know me, I just refer to him as dad because that's exactly who he is and what he's always been to me. Um, and I say that part to say I still had a relationship with my biological father, but he lived in Texas bulk of my life at that time growing up. And fortunately, it got to a space where when I was old enough, whether it was playing football or graduation like that, both my biological dad and my stepdad actually still had a healthy enough relationship where when they would come visit, we would all hang out together. You know what I mean? Like
Well, that
like
you are the
me and my
poster
brothers,
child for that.
my brothers, my stepdad, and my dad, we would all hang out together. And I called both of them dad right in front of each other. So that's what I mean when I'm saying like as challenging as certain things are, I'm also grateful because I still was able to get certain experiences that I know aren't common, but you don't know until you get out, right? Like you were talking about at the very beginning of this. And so, in a very similar way, like I said, I've had so many different layers of experience and these other little like undercurrent, like moments within all of it. And that where it's relative to my baby brother Akeem is, he may not always be able to articulate himself, but he can always feel things. He's still very intuitive in that sense. And so it was very hard watching him have to try to process, my parents going through a divorce, because in his mind, he's thinking he's a problem or he's part of it. So he's going around saying sorry to both my parents, like he did
Oh
something wrong.
man.
That stuff, yeah, that stuff ate me up.
Yeah, that's
I like, I
heartbreaking.
like it's heartbreaking, but it also made me angry, because I'm like, no, this is not how this is supposed to go. Blah blah blah. So I say that part just to say, in the space I'm in now in life, um, I'm still very sensitive to what the perception of things are, not from the standpoint of I'm worried about the greater public. I think about the optics of it for how it impacts my brother. And I think that to some degree that helps me be a better father because I may want a lot of things for my son as he gets older. I may want him to play football. I may want him to do sports. I may want him to become a doctor and cure cancer, whatever those things are. We all have hopes and aspirations for our offspring, but at the end of the day, it's our hopes and dreams. We have to also take a step back and recognize that this is this is going to be an individual with their own able body, mind, and function. They may be able to do all the same things you could do. They may even be able to do some of those things or a lot of those things better than you. And that's what I think a lot of parents hope for. But what we don't always take into account is what about the things they can't do as good as you did? How do you handle that? And so having a brother who maybe could not do all the same things I could do, even though I wanted him to, I think it helps me curb my expectations and kind of level set mentally and emotionally to prepare for all those different outcomes, right? I don't try to like stress about it, but it's like, hey, I don't know what my son's going to be able to do or not do. I want to give him exposure to things. I want to help him, but who knows what he's going to gravitate towards or what's going to be important to him. So all I could do is do my best to try to help him, guide him, pour in what I hope are the right values so that he's just a good natured human person. And I think that part to me is very much how I tap into my brother Akeem because he can't do everything, but he is a good natured, good human. And by definition, just being somebody that helps people and takes pleasure in helping people. You know, it's not conditional. It's not for self gratification. It's not for public recognition. So, that all those experiences as a brother and having someone with a special need helps remind and level set me and keep me balanced, or what I hope is a balanced perspective, as not just a parent, really as a human. And so that's really I think like some of my key takeaways with my lifelong experience with him so far.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what are your words of encouragement for other sibs out there listening?
I think that because there's obviously a wide variety of different, like disabilities, there's always going to be a moving target with what is right or what works for you, your sibling, and your greater family dynamic. I think it's healthy to have some sense of community and to educate yourself, in terms of like understanding what that condition is, what types of resources or support your sibling may need as a result of that. Because one thing I do think that is our responsibility as a sibling is to be an advocate. And now, how you advocate is for you to determine and figure out for yourself because some people aren't as outgoing, you know what I mean? In the sense of like they may not be as extroverted. So maybe they don't want to go to these random groups and meetings or events and meet people, right? That might not be their lane. But if you educate yourself, there's a way to still push out or disseminate that information and raise awareness in your own lane. And similarly, when it comes to just understanding how you want to support your sibling, right? In terms of advocating for them in the actual moment, you you don't want to wait until you're faced with those moments where you have to make a decision because then you may end up in a scenario where you're living not necessarily in regret but you're living in the rearview mirror where you're always second guessing yourself like man, I wonder how this would have been if I made this decision instead of that. Like you're never going to make a perfect decision all the time. That's just not a realistic expectation. But what you can hope to do is have an informed decision, and making an informed decision is just making sure you're aware of all the information that's available to you and you've educated yourself on those things, and then you just use that to move forward with the best intentions. I think that those things are really important because we all love our siblings. I think I would like to think we love our special needs siblings a little bit more, because
It's
there's just a different dynamic
a
there. And
different
so
type of care, yeah.
yeah, so how you show that love can mean a number of different ways, but I do think as a sibling, especially when you get older, I think it is our responsibility to educate ourselves enough that we can advocate for them because they may not be able to always do it for themselves, and they may not even be in the rooms that to allow them the opportunity to advocate for themselves. So that would be, something that I don't want to just say needs to happen. I pose it more as like an opportunity to everyone. And then I would also say making sure they take time to process the experiences as well on their own terms. I think because when you're younger, you're a sibling. Again, there's certain expectations placed on you, whether by your parents or self-imposed, and then there's also the element of just as you get older, wanting to do certain things for yourself and grappling with the guilt associated with that. But that's a normal part of the process, I would say. And so At the end of the day, you also have to remind yourself that you can only help others when you're helping yourself. Because if you're not prioritizing yourself and you're not making sure you're whole and you're healed and you're in a good space, you won't be good to anybody else, including your special needs sibling.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you for sharing your story and for your encouragement and this chat.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Charlene. I really actually enjoyed this. So, if anybody hears this and has questions, I think you already have my Instagram information, but it's Joshua.Javon.360. Javon spelled Javon. And so Joshua spelled just like it sounds. But they can obviously reach out to me on there. I don't necessarily post a lot, but I do have him on my page. I did birthday shout outs and stuff like that. So if anybody ever wants to talk or they have questions or they want to inquire about me, I'm really transparent. I'll tell people as much as they're comfortable with. So if you ever want to reach out to me, that's where they can find me.
Awesome. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Thanks for listening to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. I hope you had a good time listening and feel encouraged in your own journey as a sibling to someone with special needs. If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. And if you want to hear more stories, please subscribe to the show. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, the show can't happen without you. All special needs siblings have their own unique stories, challenges, family dynamics, and lots of life to talk about and explore. This podcast is here to let you know that you're not alone and that you matter. If you would like to be on the show or just chat off the record, please contact me. My info is in the show notes. Until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.